Have you ever wondered what it feels like when your entire world collapses in a single moment? When the person you trusted most becomes your worst enemy, and the life you built crumbles like a house of cards in a hurricane? Tonight I want to tell you about Sophia, a successful businesswoman who thought she had everything figured out until she discovered that love, trust, and family legacy could all be weapons in the wrong hands. Picture this. You're driving through the middle of nowhere, rain hammering against your windshield so hard you can barely see the road ahead. Your hands are shaking, not from the cold, but from pure terror because the man you were supposed to marry is hunting you with resources you never knew he had. You're not just running from a broken relationship. You're running for your life, carrying secrets that could destroy everything your family spent generations building. But here's what Sophia didn't expect when she stumbled through that storm. Sometimes when you're running from your worst nightmare, you run straight into your greatest blessing. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't who you think it'll be, and sometimes the scariest thing isn't the danger behind you, but the possibility of love ahead of you. This is a story about what happens when desperation meets destiny. When a woman with nothing left to lose meets a man who's forgotten how to hope. It's about the moment when someone looks at you, really sees you, at your absolute worst and decides you're worth protecting anyway. And most importantly, it's about learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't running away from something, but running towards someone who makes you want to be brave enough for both of you. So settle in, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about love, trust, and what it really means to find shelter in another person's heart. Picture this. You're driving through the middle of nowhere, rain hammering your windshield so hard you can barely see the road ahead. Your hands are shaking on the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from pure terror. That's exactly where Sophia found herself that night. A successful businesswoman who'd built her empire from nothing, now running for her life with nothing but the clothes on her back and secrets that could destroy everything she'd ever worked for. See, here's what most people don't understand about desperation. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps up on you slowly, then hits like a sledgehammer. Sophia had spent months pretending everything was fine, smiling at board meetings while her business partner, the man she was supposed to marry, was systematically betraying her trust. The family deal that was meant to secure her sister's future had turned into a death trap, and now she was paying the price for trusting the wrong person. The storm that night wasn't just meteorological. It was emotional, spiritual, everything crashing down at once. Her car had finally given up about 5 miles back, leaving her to stumble through the darkness soaked to the bone with nowhere to go. You know that feeling when you realize you're truly alone in the world? When everyone you thought you could count on has either abandoned you or turned against you? That's where Sophia was, literally and figuratively lost in the storm. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes that's when the universe throws you exactly what you need, even if you don't recognize it at first. Through the sheets of rain, she spotted a faint glow in the distance. A cabin, isolated and almost hidden among the trees like something out of a fairy tale. Except this wasn't a fairy tale, and Sophia had stopped. Believing in happy endings months ago, her feet were numb in her designer heels shoes that had walked into countless boardrooms but were completely useless for trudging through mud and fallen leaves. Every step was a struggle, every breath a fight against the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She'd never felt so small, so powerless, so completely out of control. This was a woman who'd negotiated million-dollar deals, who'd stared down the toughest competitors in her industry, reduced to a shivering figure desperately seeking shelter. When she finally reached that door, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely form a fist to knock. 3 weak taps. That's all she managed before her strength gave out. For a moment, she thought nobody was home, thought she'd have to find somewhere else to hide or maybe just give up entirely. But then she heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, and the door swung open. Daniel filled the entire doorframe, 6 feet of solid muscle and controlled intensity that made Sophia take an instinctive step backward. This wasn't some friendly hermit living off the grid for fun. This was a man who'd seen things, done things, carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that comes from surviving situations most people only see in movies. His dark eyes swept over her once, taking in everything. The expensive clothes ruined by rain, the terror she was trying so hard to hide, the way she was barely holding herself together. Most people would have asked questions. What are you doing here? Who are you running from? Are you hurt? But Daniel wasn't most people. His military training had taught him to read situations instantly, and what he saw was a woman in genuine distress who needed help more than she needed an interrogation. There was something else too, a spark of recognition that had nothing to do with familiarity and everything to do with chemistry. The kind of instant attraction that hits you like lightning and changes everything in a heartbeat. Sophia looked up into those intense dark eyes, expecting suspicion, maybe even rejection. Instead, she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. Protection, acceptance, and something deeper she couldn't name. When Daniel spoke, his voice was low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet, carrying the kind of authority that made you listen without question. Come in and stay with me. 4 simple words that would change both their lives forever. Not what's wrong, or who are you? Just a command wrapped in an invitation, delivered with the kind of certainty that made Sophia's knees go weak with relief. He stepped aside, creating space for her to enter, and she realized this was the first time in months that someone had offered her shelter without wanting something in return. But as Sophia crossed that threshold, shivering and vulnerable, she had no idea she was walking into something far more dangerous than the storm she'd left behind. Because sometimes the safest place can become the most complicated place, and the person who saves you might just be the one who changes everything you thought you knew about yourself. The thing about lies is they start small, innocent even, and before you know it, they've built an entire world around you that you can't escape. Sophia learned this the hard way as she stood in Daniel's cabin, dripping rainwater onto his hardwood floors, trying to figure out who she was going to pretend to be. Because the truth would send her right back into that storm, and she wasn't ready to face what was waiting for her out there. I'm Emma, she said, the name rolling off her tongue before she could stop herself. It was her middle name. Technically not a complete lie, but close enough to make her stomach twist with guilt. I'm on a creative retreat. You know, getting away from the city to find inspiration. She watched Daniel's face carefully, looking for any sign that he didn't buy her story, but his expression remained unreadable, those dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he disappeared into what she assumed was the bedroom and returned with a stack of dry clothes, an oversized flannel shirt and sweatpants that would swallow her whole. Bathroom's down the hall, he said simply. Get changed before you catch pneumonia. There was something about the way he said it, matter-of-fact but caring. That made Sophia realize she was dealing with someone completely different from the corporate shark she was used to. When she emerged 20 minutes later, warm and dry for the first time in hours, she found Daniel sitting at a rough-hewn wooden table with 2 cups of coffee steaming between his hands. The cabin was spartanly furnished but surprisingly cozy. Everything had a purpose, nothing was there just for show. It was the complete opposite of her penthouse apartment, with its designer everything and strategic placement of expensive art, meant to impress visitors. Ground rules, Daniel said without preamble, pushing one of the coffee cups toward her. His voice carried the kind of authority that suggested this wasn't a negotiation. First, this isn't a bed and breakfast. You help with chores, you clean up after yourself, and you don't touch my equipment. He gestured toward a corner where Sophia could see what looked like sophisticated radio equipment and other devices she couldn't identify. Second, we don't do small talk about feelings or past relationships. You're here to write or paint or whatever creative types do, and I'm here to be left alone. We can coexist without becoming best friends. There was something in his tone that suggested this rule was more for his protection than hers, and Sophia found herself wondering what had happened to make him so determined to keep people at arm's length. Third, if someone comes looking for you, I don't know anything about you. Emma who? Never heard of her. This last rule made Sophia's blood run cold because it confirmed what she'd been hoping he wouldn't figure out, that she was running from something serious. But instead of pressing her for details, Daniel simply nodded toward the couch. You can sleep there. I'll get you some blankets. The first few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Sophia would wake up to find Daniel already gone. She'd catch glimpses of him through the windows, chopping wood or checking the perimeter of his property, with the methodical precision of someone conducting a security sweep. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and constant awareness of his surroundings. It should have been intimidating, but instead, Sophia found it oddly comforting. She tried to maintain her cover story, sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook, pretending to work on some fictional creative project, but her eyes kept drifting to Daniel, studying the way he carried himself, the subtle scars on his hands that spoke of a life she couldn't even imagine. He was nothing like the polished businessmen in her world, rough around the edges, brutally honest, and completely unimpressed by the kind of charm that had gotten her through countless board meetings. The attraction was impossible to ignore, and that terrified her more than the men who were hunting her. This wasn't the shallow, strategic kind of chemistry she'd had with her ex-fiancé. This was raw, primal, the kind that made her skin tingle when Daniel's fingers accidentally brushed hers as he handed her a cup of coffee. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, his dark eyes unreadable but intense, and she'd feel her cheeks flush like a teenager with her first crush. "You're not a writer," Daniel said one evening, breaking his own rule about small talk. They were sitting by the fire, the only sound the crackling of logs and the distant rumble of thunder, another storm rolling through. "Your hands are too soft and you hold that pen like you're signing contracts, not creating art." Sophia's heart stopped. "What makes you think that?" 20 years of reading people who are lying to me," Daniel replied calmly. "But here's the thing, Emma, or whatever your real name is, I don't care what you're running from. Everyone's got demons. The question is whether you're dangerous to have around." The honest answer was yes, she was incredibly dangerous to have around, but looking into those steady dark eyes, Sophia found herself wanting to tell him everything. About the betrayal, about the family business that was supposed to be her legacy, about the sister she was trying to protect. Instead, she just nodded and said, "I won't bring trouble to your door." It was another lie because trouble was already circling them like wolves in the dark. Back in the city, her ex-fiancé was pulling strings, calling in favors, systematically dismantling everything she'd built while tracking her location. But in this cabin, with this man who asked no questions and demanded no explanations, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in years: safety. The problem with feeling safe is that it makes you careless, makes you forget that the world outside is still hunting you. And as Sophia fell asleep on Daniel's couch that night, listening to the steady sound of his breathing from the bedroom, she had no idea that her carefully constructed lie was about to collide with a truth that would change everything. Time has this strange way of bending when you're living in isolation with someone. Days blur together, and before you know it, what started as a temporary arrangement begins to feel like something else entirely. That's exactly what happened to Sophia and Daniel over the next few weeks. Their careful boundaries started crumbling like walls built on shifting sand. It began with small things, the kind of moments that seem insignificant until you look back and realize they changed everything. Sophia would catch Daniel staring at her while she pretended to write, and instead of looking away, he'd hold her gaze for just a second longer than necessary. She'd find little gestures of care that he tried to disguise as practicality. Her coffee cup already filled when she woke up, an extra blanket left on the couch during cold nights, the good pieces of firewood saved for when she was sitting by the fire. The breakthrough came on a particularly rough night when Sophia woke up screaming from a nightmare. Not the gentle kind of bad dream that fades quickly, but the visceral, soul-crushing kind that leaves you gasping and disoriented, unsure of what's real and what's fear. She'd been dreaming about her sister, about the threats that had driven her to run, about everything falling apart despite her best efforts to hold it together. Daniel was beside her in seconds, moving with that silent efficiency that spoke of military training, but his voice was surprisingly gentle when he said, "Hey, you're safe. Whatever you were dreaming about, it's not here." His hands hovered near her shoulders, wanting to comfort but respecting her space, and something about that careful consideration broke something open inside Sophia's chest. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. And for the first time since arriving, she wasn't talking about her fake creative retreat. She was talking about the weight of carrying secrets that were slowly crushing her, about pretending to be someone she wasn't, about running from a situation that would eventually catch up with her, no matter how far she ran. Daniel sat down on the edge of the couch, his presence solid and reassuring in the dim light filtering through the windows. "Then don't," he said simply. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever you're hiding from, you don't have to carry it alone anymore." That's when the dam broke. Sophia found herself telling him everything, about the family business her grandmother had built from nothing, about the sister who trusted her to protect what they'd inherited, about the man she'd loved who'd turned into her worst nightmare. She told him about the contracts that had been forged, The money that had been moved. The threats that had become too real to ignore. He said he'd destroy everything if I didn't marry him. Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just the business, but my sister's future. Our family's reputation, everything our grandmother worked for. I thought I could outmaneuver him. Thought I was smart enough to find a way out, but I was wrong. The night I left, I overheard him planning something that would have sent my sister to prison for crimes she didn't commit. Daniel listened without interruption, his face grave but not judgmental. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd told him. "What's your real name?" he asked finally. "Sophia," she said. And hearing it out loud after weeks of being Emma felt like taking a deep breath after holding it too long. Sophia Martinez. "Well, Sophia Martinez," Daniel said, and something about the way he said her name made her skin tingle. "You're not the first person to show up at my door running from something bigger than they could handle. And you won't be the last." There was something in his tone that invited reciprocity, and Sophia realized this was his way of offering his own vulnerability in exchange for hers. She waited, not pushing, just creating space for whatever he was ready to share. "I used to lead a special operations team," Daniel said, his voice taking on that distant quality that meant he was traveling back to places he'd rather not revisit. "We were good at what we did, maybe too good. There was a mission, classified, of course, where we were sent to extract a family that had been providing intelligence. Father, mother, 2 kids. He paused, his hands clenching and unclenching, and Sophia could see the struggle playing out on his face. "We got there too late. By minutes, maybe seconds. The whole family was gone, and it was my job to make sure their sacrifice meant something. Instead, I watched everything we'd worked for fall apart because of politics and bureaucracy, and people who cared more about covering their asses than honoring the dead." Sophia reached out instinctively, her fingers covering his, and was surprised when he didn't pull away. "That's why you're out here alone." "That's why I don't get involved in other people's problems anymore," Daniel corrected. But even as he said it, they both knew it wasn't true. He was already involved in her problems, had been from the moment he opened his door and told her to stay. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes when 2 people have shared something real, something that matters. Sophia found herself studying Daniel's face in the firelight, seeing past the hard edges to the man underneath who'd been carrying his own burdens alone for too long. "Thank you," she said softly, "for listening, for not making me feel like a fool for trusting the wrong person." "Trust isn't foolishness," Daniel replied. "Betrayal is." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sophia felt something shift between them, something that had been building for weeks, finally acknowledged. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" Before Sophia could answer, before she could even process what she was doing, she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't planned or strategic or calculated. It was pure instinct. The need to connect with someone who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and hadn't walked away. Daniel went perfectly still for a heartbeat, and Sophia's heart nearly stopped, thinking she'd misread everything. But then he kissed her back, his hand sliding up to cup her face, and Sophia realized this was what she'd been running toward all along. Not just away from her past, but toward something she hadn't even known she was looking for. The kiss was gentle but intense, carrying weeks of unspoken tension and newly shared trust, tasting like coffee and possibility and the kind of honesty that changes everything. When they finally broke apart, Sophia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Daniel could hear it. The look in his eyes was different now, still protective, still careful, but warmer, more open than she'd ever seen. "This complicates things," Daniel said quietly, but he didn't sound like he regretted it. Sophia smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed in months. "I think things were already complicated." What neither of them realized was that their growing closeness had created a vulnerability that their enemies were already beginning to exploit. Because sometimes when you finally find something worth protecting, that's exactly when the world decides to test whether you're strong enough to keep it. You know that feeling when you wake up and something's different, but you can't quite put your finger on what? That's exactly how Sophia felt the morning after she and Daniel had shared their deepest secrets and that kiss that changed everything. The cabin felt smaller somehow, charged with an energy that made every casual touch feel electric, every shared glance loaded with meaning. Daniel was already up, as usual, But today was different. Instead of his normal routine of checking the perimeter and chopping wood, he was sitting at his radio equipment, fingers flying over the keyboard with the kind of focused intensity that meant business. Sophia watched from the kitchen, coffee cup in hand, as lines of text scrolled across multiple screens. Information she couldn't read from this distance but could tell was serious by the set of Daniel's shoulders. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. But Daniel's response made her blood run cold. "Define okay," he said without turning around. "Because if you mean is someone actively hunting for Sophia Martinez using every database and connection they can get their hands on, then no, everything's definitely not okay." Sophia's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, but she barely noticed. "What do you mean?" Daniel finally turned around, and the look in his eyes was unlike anything she'd seen before. Not angry exactly, but disappointed in a way that cut deeper than rage. "I mean, your ex-fiancé has been very busy since you disappeared. Corporate espionage charges, embezzlement accusations, even a missing person report claiming you might be suffering from a mental breakdown. Very thorough, very professional, and completely designed to make you look like either a criminal or a victim who can't be trusted." The room started spinning. Sophia gripped the counter for support, trying to process what Daniel was telling her. "That's impossible. I have documentation, proof that he's the one who—" "Documentation that mysteriously disappeared from your personal accounts 3 days ago," Daniel interrupted, his voice getting colder with each word, "along with your access to company funds, your emergency credit cards, and your sister's trust fund. He's been systematically erasing your ability to fight back while making it look like you're the one who stole everything." Sophia felt like she was drowning. "How do you know all this?" "Because I did what I should have done the night you showed up at my door," Daniel said, turning back to his screens. "I ran a background check. Real name, real situation, real enemies. And what I found is that you're not just running from some jealous ex-boyfriend, Sophia. You're running from someone with the resources and connections to destroy lives. And you brought that danger straight to my doorstep." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "I never meant for what? For me to get involved? For me to care about what happens to you?" Daniel's voice was harsh now, all the gentleness from the night before replaced by the cold efficiency of a soldier assessing a threat. "Well, congratulations. Mission accomplished. Because now I'm in this whether I want to be or not." Sophia stared at him, seeing the walls going back up in real time, watching him retreat into the protective shell he'd built around himself after losing his team. "Daniel, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for weeks? That every moment of trust we built was based on deception? That the woman I kissed last night doesn't actually exist?" His words were like bullets, precise and devastating. "I told you about my team, about why I don't get involved in other people's wars, and you let me do it anyway, knowing you were dragging me into exactly the kind of situation that destroyed my life once before." The worst part was that he was right. Sophia had known from the beginning that staying here meant putting Daniel in danger, but she'd been selfish, desperate, afraid to face the truth of how alone she really was. "I was scared," she whispered, hating how pathetic the words sounded. "So was every person I've ever failed to protect," Daniel replied, but some of the hardness went out of his voice. "Fear doesn't make the bullets hurt less. Sophia, it doesn't make the consequences disappear." Before Sophia could respond, before she could try to find words that might bridge the chasm that had just opened between them, a new sound cut through the tension, the distant rumble of vehicles approaching through the forest. Multiple vehicles moving fast but trying to stay quiet, the kind of approach that meant trouble was about to knock down their door. Daniel went completely still, every muscle in his body shifting into combat mode. "How many people knew you were coming this direction?" "Nobody," Sophia said, but even as the word left her mouth, she realized it wasn't true. "I used GPS to find this place. If Marcus has access to my car's navigation system, he does." Daniel was already moving, grabbing equipment from various hiding places around the cabin, with the efficiency of someone who'd planned for this exact scenario. "Corporate surveillance contracts with auto manufacturers. It's the first place I would have looked if I were hunting someone." The sound of engines was getting closer, and Sophia could make out at least 3 separate vehicles, maybe 4. Her ex-fiancé wasn't taking any chances this time. He'd brought enough people to handle whatever resistance he might encounter. "What do we do?" Sophia asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded despite the panic coursing through her veins. Daniel handed her a tactical vest and a communication device, his movements brisk and professional. We survive. And then we have a very long conversation about trust and consequences, and what it really means to drag someone into your war. He paused, looking directly into her eyes. But that conversation happens after we make sure you live long enough to have it. Sophia strapped on the vest with shaking fingers, watching as Daniel transformed from the gentleman who'd held her during her nightmare into something harder, more dangerous. This was the soldier he'd been before the isolation, before the guilt had driven him to hide from the world, and she realized she was about to see exactly what he'd been protecting her from by keeping his distance. One more thing, Daniel said as he checked his weapon and moved toward the windows to assess their situation. That kiss last night? The trust we shared? That was real, even if everything else was a lie. But if we don't handle this right, it might be the last real thing either of us ever experiences. Outside, the vehicles were getting into position, surrounding the cabin with military precision. Sophia could hear doors slamming, voices coordinating over radio, the sound of people who were very good at hunting other people. Her ex-fiancé had found her, and he'd brought an army to make sure she never escaped again. But as Sophia looked at Daniel, saw the cold determination in his eyes as he prepared to fight for her despite everything, she realized something that made her heart race with equal parts terror and hope. She might have lied about everything else, but her feelings for this man were the most honest thing in her life. And sometimes, when everything else falls apart, that kind of truth is worth fighting for. When violence erupts, time doesn't slow down like in the movies. It speeds up, compresses into moments of pure instinct where thinking gets you killed and survival becomes the only thing that matters. Sophia discovered this truth the hard way when the first window exploded inward, showering the cabin with glass and the sharp crack of gunfire. Daniel moved like liquid shadow, pulling Sophia behind the heavy oak table he'd flipped over for cover, his body shielding hers as bullets splintered the wood above their heads. "Stay low, stay behind me, and when I tell you to move, you move," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. This wasn't panic, this was training taking over, years of experience in situations exactly like this one. "How many?" Sophia asked, surprised she could form words when her heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. 6, maybe 7, Daniel replied, listening to the pattern of gunfire with the kind of professional assessment that comes from surviving too many firefights to count. "They're trying to flush us out, not kill us immediately, which means your ex-fiancé wants you alive. That's good and bad. Good because they'll hesitate to use explosives. Bad because it means they're planning to take their time." Another volley of shots shattered more windows, and Sophia could hear voices shouting orders outside, coordinated, professional, the kind of tactical communication that meant these weren't just thugs Marcus had hired off the street. These were professionals, possibly military contractors, people who knew what they were doing. "Marcus doesn't have this kind of money," Sophia said, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Corporate security, sure, but not military-grade operatives. Your ex-fiancé's got partners," Daniel said grimly, checking his weapon. "The kind of people who turn corporate espionage into warfare when the stakes get high enough. Question is, what were you really involved in, Sophia? Because normal business deals don't require this level of firepower." Before Sophia could answer, she heard a voice from outside that made her blood freeze. Marcus himself, amplified by some kind of speaker system, his smooth corporate tone completely at odds with the violence surrounding them. "Sophia, sweetheart, this doesn't have to get ugly," he called out, and hearing him use that pet name he'd whispered during their relationship made her stomach turn. "Just come out and we can work this whole thing out like civilized adults. Nobody else has to get hurt." "Like hell," Daniel muttered, then looked directly at Sophia. "Listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, they're going to try to breach that door. When they do, I need you to run to the back bedroom and lock yourself in the bathroom. There's a window that leads to the roof." "I'm not leaving you," Sophia interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I won't run again, Daniel. I can't." Daniel's expression softened for just a moment, but then hardened back into tactical focus. "This isn't about running. It's about staying alive long enough to figure out how to win." Another burst of gunfire, closer this time, and Sophia could hear the sound of boots on the porch. They were moving in for the breach, probably counting on overwhelming force to end this quickly. But they didn't know Daniel. didn't understand what kind of man they were dealing with. "There's something I need to tell you," Sophia said urgently, knowing this might be her last chance. "That kiss last night, what we shared, it wasn't just vulnerability or fear or loneliness. I'm falling in love with you, Daniel. I know that sounds crazy. I know the timing is terrible. But if we don't make it out of this, I need you to know that everything I felt was real." Daniel went perfectly still, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made everything else fade away for just a heartbeat. "Sophia." The front door exploded inward, cut short whatever he'd been about to say, and suddenly the cabin was full of armed figures in tactical gear, moving with deadly precision. But Daniel was already in motion, years of special operations training kicking in as he returned fire with surgical accuracy, using the cabin's layout to his advantage. Sophia had never seen anything like it, the way Daniel moved through space like he owned it, the calm efficiency with which he neutralized threats, the protective fury that transformed him into something both beautiful and terrifying. This was the man who'd led special operations teams, who'd fought wars in places that didn't exist on official maps, and he was fighting for her. "Behind you," Sophia screamed as one of the operatives flanked around through the kitchen, and Daniel spun, dropping the threat before it could get a clean shot. In that moment, Sophia realized she wasn't just a victim anymore. She was part of a team, and teams protected each other. "The communications equipment," Daniel said during a brief lull in the gunfire. "Can you reach it?" Sophia looked across the room to where Daniel's radio setup was still intact behind an overturned bookshelf. It was exposed, dangerous but possible. "What do you need me to do?" "Emergency frequency, channel 7. Military distress call. Tell them we have civilians under fire at these coordinates and need immediate assistance." Daniel's voice was steady, professional, but Sophia could see the calculation in his eyes. He was running scenarios, trying to figure out how to keep them both alive until help arrived. Sophia took a deep breath, then sprinted across the room, sliding behind the communications equipment, just as another window shattered above her head. Her fingers found the controls Daniel had showed her weeks ago, when she'd been curious about his setup. Muscle memory taking over as she switched to the emergency frequency. "Mayday, mayday. This is civilian emergency at coordinates." She rattled off the numbers she'd memorized from Daniel's GPS system, her voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos around her. "We have multiple armed assailants. Request immediate assistance. Repeat immediate assistance." A calm voice crackled back through the static. "Copy that, civilian emergency. Military assistance en route. ETA 12 minutes. Hold your position. 12 minutes. Sophia had never realized how long 12 minutes could be when measured in heartbeats and gunfire, and the space between life and death. But as she looked at Daniel, saw him checking his ammunition with the kind of grim determination that meant he'd fight until his last breath to protect her, she realized something that made her heart race with more than just adrenaline. "When this is over," she called out to him during another brief pause in the assault, "when we survive this, and we will survive this, I want you to know that staying with you isn't about having nowhere else to go anymore. It's about choosing to be here, choosing you, choosing us." Daniel's response was cut short by Marcus's voice over the speaker again, but this time there was an edge of frustration that hadn't been there before. "Sophia, you're being unreasonable. Just come out and we can end this without any more bloodshed. Your friend doesn't have to die for your mistakes." That's when Sophia realized the most important thing of all. Marcus was wrong. This wasn't about her mistakes anymore. This was about the choice she'd made to trust Daniel, to let him into her heart, to believe that some things were worth fighting for. And sometimes, when you finally find something worth protecting, the whole world conspires to test whether you're strong enough to keep it. Sometimes the most profound moments of your life happen in the space between one breath and the next. In that suspended second when everything you thought you knew about yourself gets rewritten by circumstances beyond your control. For Sophia, that moment came when the sound of military helicopters cut through the morning air, drowning out the gunfire that had been her reality for the past hour. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle wasn't over yet. Marcus and his remaining operatives were cornered now. Professional enough to know when they'd been outmaneuvered, but desperate enough to make one last play. Through the shattered windows, Sophia could see military personnel taking positions, hear the amplified voice of a commander demanding immediate surrender. "It's over, Marcus," Sophia called out, finding her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Military's here, your team's surrounded. And whatever game you were playing just became federal territory. Marcus's response came not through the speaker this time, but through the front door as he stepped inside, weapon drawn but pointed downward. A gesture that was part surrender, part final negotiation. He looked exactly like the man she'd once planned to marry, perfectly groomed even in defeat, but something in his eyes had changed. Desperation had replaced the cold calculation she remembered. "You don't understand what you've done, Sophia," he said, his corporate smooth talk finally cracking to reveal the fury underneath. "This wasn't personal. This was business, big business, the kind that keeps entire governments stable. You think your little family company was worth destroying international relationships over?" Daniel hadn't lowered his weapon, and Sophia could see the tactical assessment running through his mind. Distance, angles, threat level, civilian safety. This was still his operation until the military secured the scene, and he wasn't taking any chances with Marcus's sudden appearance of reasonableness. International relationships? Sophia stepped out from behind their makeshift cover, ignoring Daniel's sharp gesture to stay down. "You mean arms deals, don't you? That's what this was really about. Using our shipping infrastructure to move weapons, and when I started asking questions about the new contracts, you decided I was too much of a liability." Marcus's laugh was bitter, completely devoid of the charm that had once made her fall for him. "You always were too smart for your own good. Yes, it was arms deals. Yes, your precious family business was the perfect front for moving merchandise that certain governments needed to stay off official records. And yes, when you started digging into things that didn't concern you, you became a problem that needed solving. By framing my sister? By destroying everything my grandmother built?" Sophia's voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the fury burning underneath. The rage of someone who'd finally understood the full scope of the betrayal. "By offering you a partnership," Marcus corrected. "Marriage, shared control, a life of luxury beyond anything you could have imagined. All you had to do was stop asking questions and let the adults handle the business. But you had to be noble, didn't you? Had to protect your sister's innocence and your grandmother's memory." The sound of boots on the porch meant the military was moving in, but Marcus seemed oblivious to the tactical situation developing around him. He was focused entirely on Sophia, as if explaining his justifications might somehow undo everything that had led to this moment. "Here's what you don't understand," Sophia said, and Daniel heard something in her voice that made him proud despite everything. Strength, clarity, the kind of conviction that comes from finally knowing who you are and what you stand for. "I didn't choose Daniel's cabin as a random hiding place. I chose to run toward something instead of just away from you." Marcus's expression shifted, and for the first time, he seemed to notice Daniel's presence as more than just an obstacle. "And what exactly did you run toward? Some has-been soldier playing hermit in the woods?" "I ran toward honesty," Sophia replied. "Toward someone who asked no questions but gave me safety anyway. Toward a man who saw me at my worst and didn't try to use it against me. I ran toward love, Marcus, the real kind that doesn't come with conditions and contracts." Daniel felt something shift inside his chest at her words, the last of his walls crumbling as he realized what Sophia was really saying. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about choice, about the decision to build something real from the ashes of everything they'd both lost. "You think this story has a happy ending?" Marcus asked, but his voice lacked conviction now. "You think the military's going to protect you from the people I work for?" "This was just the beginning, Sophia. There are forces at play here that—" His words were cut short as military personnel flooded the cabin, moving with the kind of overwhelming force that ends situations decisively. Marcus was on the ground, hands secured behind his back before he could finish his threat. The commander, a stern-faced woman with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen everything, approached Daniel and Sophia. "You folks okay?" she asked, her tone professional but not unkind. "Medics are standing by if you need attention." "We're fine," Daniel replied, but Sophia could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way holding on to combat readiness for so long had drained him. "What happens now?" "Now we sort this mess out," the commander said. "Ms. Martinez will need your full cooperation in documenting everything you know about these arms deals. Mr. Chen, your military record speaks for itself. We appreciate the assist on the tactical situation." As the military secured the scene and began processing Marcus and his surviving operatives, Daniel and Sophia found themselves alone on the cabin's back porch, watching the sun rise over the forest that had become their battleground. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes after surviving something together. "So," Daniel said finally, his voice softer than she'd heard it since before the shooting started. "About what you said in there. About choosing to run toward something instead of away from something." Sophia turned to face him, seeing past the tactical vest and the weapons to the man underneath who'd risked everything to protect her. "I meant every word. The kiss, the feelings, the choice to stay, all of it was real, Daniel. More real than anything I had before." Daniel reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with the kind of gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that had just been holding weapons. "I told you to stay with me that first night because you needed shelter from the storm. But somewhere along the way that changed." "Changed into what?" Sophia asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Changed into me needing you to stay because I can't imagine this place, or my life, without you in it." Daniel's dark eyes held hers, steady and sure. "So I'm asking again, Sophia Martinez, but this time it's not about running from something or hiding from someone. Stay with me because you're running toward us, toward whatever we can build together." Sophia's answer was another kiss. But this one was different from the desperate connection they'd shared during the nightmare or the passionate moment by the fire. This kiss was a promise, a choice, a commitment to whatever came next. When they finally broke apart, Sophia smiled, the kind of genuine, unguarded expression that transformed her entire face. "I'm staying, Daniel. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this us is exactly where I want to be." As the sun climbed higher, painting the forest in shades of gold and possibility, Sophia realized that sometimes the best way to find your future is to stop running from your past and start walking toward the person who makes you want to be brave enough for both. So here we are at the end of Sophia and Daniel's story, but I want you to think about something powerful. This isn't just a story about two people finding love in impossible circumstances. This is a story about what happens when you stop running from your problems and start running toward your solutions. It's about the moment you realize that the scariest thing isn't being alone with your struggles, but finally having someone who makes those struggles worth fighting through. Sophia could have kept running forever, could have spent her entire life looking over her shoulder, afraid of what Marcus might do next. Instead, she made a choice that changed everything. She chose vulnerability over safety, truth over comfort, love over fear. And Daniel? He could have stayed hidden in his cabin forever, protected by his walls and his isolation. But he chose to open his door, literally and figuratively, to let someone else's storm become his responsibility. Here's the question that should be keeping you awake tonight. What storms are you running from in your own life? What Marcus is chasing you? Maybe it's a toxic relationship, maybe it's a job that's crushing your soul, maybe it's family expectations that don't match who you really are. And more importantly, what cabin are you refusing to knock on because you're too afraid of what might happen if someone actually answers? Because here's what this story really teaches us. Sometimes the person who can save you is waiting on the other side of your fear. Sometimes the life you're meant to live is hiding behind the door you're too scared to knock on. Sometimes the love you deserve is standing right there, ready to say, "Stay with me." But you have to be brave enough to show up in the storm first. I want you to ask yourself right now, when was the last time you chose courage over comfort? When was the last time you ran toward something instead of away from something? When was the last time you let someone see you at your most vulnerable and discovered they wanted to protect you, not use it against you? Stop running from your storms. Start knocking on doors. Start believing that you deserve the kind of love that shows up in combat boots and tactical gear, ready to fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself. Start believing that your story doesn't have to end with you hiding from the rain. It can end with you finding someone who makes you want to dance in it. Your Sophia moment is out there waiting for you, but you have to be brave enough to step into the storm to find it. You have to be willing to knock on the door, tell your truth, and trust that the right person will say those 4 magic words. Stay with me. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own storms and the doors you haven't knocked on yet, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because we're here every week with stories that don't just entertain, they transform. Stories that remind you that you're stronger than you think, braver than you feel, and worthy of the kind of love that changes everything. Don't just watch these stories, live them. Your Daniel is out there, waiting for you to be brave enough to knock.